Rizal in Ghent. Rizal left Brussels for Ghent on July 5, 1891. His decision to move to this university city of Belgium was prompted by two reasons, namely, cheaper cost of printing in Ghent and evade the enticing attraction of Petite Suzanne. It was in this city where Rizal met Jose Lahendrina of Pampanga and Edelberto Evangelista of Manila, who were then studying engineering at the University of Ghent. With bigger financial resources on hand, Rizal was forced to live in a very cheap boarding house where Edelberto Evangelista lived. With no allowance arriving from his family in Calamba, Rizal practically had to economize on whatever little amount of money he had. He, thus, led a life of near starvation in the city of Ghent. The publication of the Filibusterismo. According to Zaide and Zaide, in 1999, after settling in Ghent, Rizal searched for a printing house, which could offer him the lowest quotation for the printing of the Fili. Fortunately, he found the F. Mayer van Loo Press, willing to publish his novel on installment basis. According to Schumacher in 1997, in order to defray the initial payment for the printing of the Fili, Rizal had to pawn his jewels. For the printing to continue, he needed cash. Thus, he became very desperate, thinking that the novel will not come off the press, as funds he expected from his friends did not arrive. He, therefore, decided to suspend its printing until his friend Valentin Ventura in Paris came to the rescue. With the financial assistance extended by Ventura, the publication of the book was completed on September 18, 1891. Rizal shipped to Hong Kong all copies of the Ghent edition, which were smuggled into the Philippines, except those copies sent to his friends in Peninsular Spain. A comparison of the Noli and Fili. According to Zaide and Zaide in 1999, these two novels differed in many respects. While Noli Me Tangere is a romantic novel, a work of the heart and a book of feeling, El Filibusterismo is a political novel, a work of the head and a book of the thought. Another point of difference between the two novels is in terms of their dedication. While Rizal dedicated the Noli to his motherland, the Fili was dedicated to the memory of Gomburza. In terms of the length of the novel, the Noli is longer since it consists of 64 chapters. On the other hand, the Fili is shorter as it consists of 38 chapters. According to Capino et al. In 1978, one common trend in both the novels is the awakening of the Filipinos to the idea that they belong to one nation, to make them realize they have a motherland to love, whose welfare should be their paramount concern. Moreover, both novels are focused towards the seeking of reforms in our society during the Spanish regime. Rizal advocated peaceful reforms in the Noli through Crisostomo Ibarra. On the other hand, Rizal advocated a revolution in effecting reforms in Filipino society in the Fili through Simon. As pointed out by Zaide and Zaide in 1999, both the Fili and Noli were good novels from the point of view of history. One reason for the aforementioned claim was that Noli and Fili depicted the actual conditions in the Philippines during the time of Rizal. Moreover, both novels were instrumental in awakening the spirit of Filipino nationalism, which paved the way for the outbreak of the Revolution of 1896 and the disintegration of the Spanish colonial empire in the Philippines.
The novel begins on board the steamer Tabo, plying the Pasig River to Laguna de Bay. With Simon were Doña Victorina, Don Tiburcio de Espadanya, Paulita Gomez, Isagani, Father Florentino, Basilio, and other passengers. Simon arrived in the Philippines as an ominous figure whose origin was unknown to many, but he wielded unlimited influence to the Governor General. He was known by many as a jeweler, who always sported large dark spectacles that concealed much of the upper part of his face. Meanwhile, Basilio, a young medical student, returned to San Diego, his native town. He was the brother of Crispin, who was beaten to death by the head sacristan of Father Salvin Danoli. Upon arriving at San Diego, he went to the spot in the forest where many years ago he had met an exhausted man who assisted him in burying his mother and helped build funeral pyre for Elias, who was shot to death at the chase in the lake. Upon arriving at the grave of his mother, Basilio found Simon without his dark glasses, digging there. Basilio soon recalled the incident that happened in the spot where Simon was 13 years ago. He recognized Ibarra, believed by many to have died during the chase in the lake. Simon thought of exterminating Basilio, for the fear that his identity might be revealed by the latter. Soon, Simon realized that he should spare Basilio, considering that he also had a grievance to resolve, that of avenging the brutal death of his mother, Sisa, as well as his brother, Crispin. In the conversation that ensued between the two, Simon informed Basilio of his true intention of returning to the country, that of destroying the brutal system that had destroyed him. Meanwhile, Simon continued using his wealth and political influence to encourage corruption and other illegal activities in the government. He promoted tyranny and complete disregard for the dignity and welfare of the poor, for them to be accustomed to the idea of death, detest the government, become desperate, and rise up in arms against the government. At the time that Simon had worked out his plan of fomenting revolution, Filipino students like Basilio and his friends earnestly pressed for assimilation, the spread of the Spanish language, and the appeals for loyalty to and the confidence in the colonial government. Simon reacted vehemently to this program of Hispanization that young students were advocating. For Simon, this would mean death of the people, destruction of national identity, and institutionalization of tyranny in the country. He even contradicted the students in their plan of establishing an academy of Spanish language. According to him, Spanish will never be a lingua franca in the country, since the people will never speak it, because the ideas of its brain and the sentiments of its heart find no phrases to express themselves in that language. As Simon said, as long as a people keeps its language, it keeps the pledge of its liberty. Just as the man preserves his independence, as long as he preserves his own way of thinking. Language is the thought of its people. Simon therefore prodded Basilio help him in mobilizing the youth in working for equality of rights, for brotherhood and representation in the Spanish Cortes, rather than waste his time advocating assimilation. Basilio was not convinced by Simon to join him in his struggle, as he was apolitical, or not interested in politics. For Basilio, his only hope was to utilize his studies to elevate the sufferings of his fellow Filipinos. Moreover, Basilio was on the belief that redemption of the country rests not on political revolution, but through devotion in science. At this point, Simon reminded Basilio of the wrong done to his mother and brother, thinking that Basilio would change his mind. Simon failed to get Basilio's commitment, but left the door open for Basilio should he change his frame of mind. Meanwhile, Simon continued preparing the way for his ultimate plan. He created abuses when they are not in existence. He encouraged the Governor General to order the demolition of all nipa houses, for a substantial bribe for a businessman engaged in selling iron roofing. He tried to win the support of the army officers by paying their debts. This, in effect, made him win the loyalty of these officers such that they were ready to start a mutiny at his command. To ensure that the army officers would support, he made it appear that the revolution was backed up by the friars to strengthen their position, and that it was a plan by the Governor-General to prolong his tenure of office in the country. When everybody was ready for the uprising, he again approached Basilio and convinced him to support the revolution that was to break out within an hour. According to Simon, this revolution will sacrifice not only the lives of tyrants, but also those who shall refuse cooperation. Simon informed Basilio of the role he was to play in the uprising. Basilio was to take a group of men to destroy the gates of the convent of Santa Clara at the height of the revolution to rescue Maria Clara. When Basilio informed Rizal of the demise of Maria Clara, Simon became dumbfounded and was not able to give the signal of the commencement of the hostilities to his followers, who were eagerly waiting to begin the revolution. Out of his dejection and depression, the revolution did not take place. For the time being, the project of the young students to establish an academy for the teaching of the Spanish language was rejected by the administrators of the university, despite the all-out support of Father Fernandez. The students therefore sought the assistance of Don Custodio, a pseudo-liberal official counselor, to satisfy the friars and the wishes of Pepe, his favorite dancer, whose support was enlisted by the students. Don Custodio recommended that the project be approved under the direction of the university friars. The next day, anti-friar posters were posted at the doors of the university. What followed was the arrest of the members of student association, including Basilio. Eventually, all were released from prison except Basilio, who was jailed for a number of months to uphold the prestige of the authority. After his release from prison, Basilio presented himself to Simon, ready to follow the latter's orders. A wedding feast was to take place that night, to be attended by the Governor-General, the friars, and other high officials of the government. Simon prepared a magnificent lamp filled with nitroglycerin and dynamite as the governor's wedding gift to Polita Gomez and Juanito Pelaez. At a given moment, the said lamp will explode, killing all guests and high officials of the state and the church. The explosion shall serve as a signal for Simon's followers to attack the city. Basilio was to lead the people to the warehouse where Simon stored weapons. Being the head of the people, who were convinced of the necessity of defending themselves, Basilio was tasked with executing those who shall refuse to follow. Convinced by Simon and driven by his desire for revenge, Basilio agreed with the plan. Waiting for the appointed moment, Basilio wandered to the scene of the nuptial feast. Seeing the lamp already in place, he suddenly left and met Isagani, the frustrated lover of Polita Gomez. Aware of what was to take place, Basilio tried to convince Isagani to leave the place. Upon learning the horrible secret device on the lamp, Isagani, who was still in love with Polita, realizes that Polita's life was in danger. He rushed into the house, grabbed the lighted lamp, and hurled it into the nearby river. The gunpowder planted in the entire house where nuptial feast was held was soon discovered. The perpetrators of the bandit raid in the area was arrested, who in turn implicated Simon. Simon was able to escape despite the cordon of soldiers surrounding the place. Nonetheless, the soldiers pursued Simon relentlessly. Mortally wounded, Simon with his treasure chest sought refuge in the home by the sea of Father Florentino, a retired Filipino priest. Spanish authorities learned that Simon was hiding in the house of Father Florentino. Lieutenant Perez of the Guardia Civil sent a word that he would be coming to arrest Simon. Upon learning that he would be arrested by a Guardia Civil, Simon took a poison before Father Florentino could stop him. Before he died, however, Simon divulged his secret to the kind-hearted priest. As Simon dies, Father Florentino murmurs, "Where are the youths who are to consecrate their budding years, their idealism and enthusiasm to the good of their country? Where are they who are to pour out their blood generously to wash away so much shame, so many crimes and abominations? Pure and immaculate must the victim be so that holocaust may be acceptable. Where are you, O youth, who are to embody in yourself the vigor of life which has been drained from our veins, the purity of ideas which has been stained in our minds, the fire of enthusiasm which has been quenched in our hearts? We await you, O youth. Come, for we await you." Father Florentino gazed at the lifeless body of Simon and took the treasure chest and threw it to the sea. As the chest sunk into the sea, he said, "May nature guard you in her deep abysses, among the pearls and corals of her internal seas. When for some holy and sublime purpose man may need you, God wills in his wisdom draw you from the bosom of the waves. Meanwhile, there you will not work woe, you will not destroy justice, you will not foment avarice."
Symbolical interpretation of the Fili. On the more abstract or philosophical level, following the thesis that the Fili is a study in revolution, the more important characters can be interpreted symbolically. Turned syndical and revolutionary as a result of past failures and disappointments. Simon could be made to represent the portion of Filipino society which, tired of the oppressor's rule, wanted that rule to be overthrown at all cost, but had no systematic plan for the new society if the old one is overthrown. Maria Clara, who after suffering from untold physical and spiritual abuse for at least 13 years, at last dies, can still be made to symbolize in the Fili, the friar-dominated culture which is now ripe for revolution. That there is no eventual union between Simon and Maria Clara. Not even meeting between the two since they parted 13 years ago is significant. Although Simon wanted very much to see and possess her, he was not permitted to do so. This is indicative, symbolically speaking, of Rizal's refusal to recognize that the friar-dominated Filipino culture could still be reinvigorated through the infusion of new elements into its anemic bloodstream. Senor Pasta, the idealist turned mercenary, could be made to represent that portion of Filipino society who have abandoned their noble social ideals and have become thoroughly self-seeking opportunists, serving only the interests of those who have hired them. Isagani, a young student who is inspired by high ideals for his country but at critical moment apparently and unwittingly forgets those ideals for selfish reasons, could be made to symbolize the untested and unreliable idealism of a segment of the educated Filipino youths of the time. Paulita Gomez, the hapless object of Isagani's affection, a girl who is more free from the fetters of convention than Maria Clara, can be made to represent that portion of Filipino womanhood, still half-breed like Maria Clara, which is relatively enlightened but which is itself almost thoroughly bereft of love of country and of a desire for the social good. Basilio, the medical student who, despite the extreme sufferings undergone by his family, as a result of clerical perfidy and cruelty, refuses to entertain any revolution, though even in the face of rampant social injustices, could be made to symbolize that segment of the educated Filipino society which has been so brutalized that it has become insensible to the social welfare. Placido Penitente is another young man who has been so disillusioned by state of affairs. He finds himself in as a student, entertains the desire to go abroad. When shown by Simon some signs of a possible uprising, he becomes so frightened that he could not make up his mind whether to join or not to join. He persuasively could be made to symbolize those elements of Philippine society which had not yet been infused with a national sentiment or social conscience. Don Custodio, a typical Spanish official in the country, who occupies several positions despite the absence of qualification, believes that any idea that does not come from him deserves no consideration. As a character in the Fili, Rizal portrayed him as one who finds pleasure in developing a feeling of inferiority among the people. According to Capino et al. In 1978 and Shumaka in 1997, the pattern of suffering in the Filibusterismo is depicted in the story of Cabezang Tales, Julie, and the schoolmaster. Cabezang Tales, a victim of land grabbing by the friars, became desperate and joined the outlaws for personal revenge. He died of fever and found no justice in the courts. Julie, innocent-looking and unaffected daughter of Cabezang Tales, a sweetheart of Basilio, took her own life because of her love for honor and chastity, rather than surrender her womanhood to the mundane desire of Father Camora. The schoolmaster, rusticated as a rebel for having experimented teaching the Spanish language to young children, against the wishes of the Spanish friars, was pardoned due to the influence wielded by Simon. Later on, he became Simon's gunpowder expert. The message of the Fili. Rizal's message in El Filibusterismo is very clear, that the present system of government in the Philippines, through corrupt officials, dominated by the friars, can lead to the downfall of Spain. This point was stressed by Simon in the novel, when he said, "What is a man to do when he is denied justice? Take the law into his own hands or wait for Spain to give him rights." From the foregoing, Rizal was very certain that because of the nature and operation of the government, those who were intelligent, generous, hardworking, courageous, and loyal citizens were driven into opposition, crime, and subversion. The Spanish colonial government for Rizal was arbitrary, cruel, lacking in a sense of justice and responsibility, without interest in the people under its tutelage. While Rizal described the government in a very negative way, his picture of the friars in the Fili was harsher. In this novel, Rizal painted them as abusing their power for the following reasons: to satisfy their evil desires, to preserve their control of education, to rob men of their land, and to seek their own interests. While Rizal lambasted the friars in the Fili and the Spanish corruption, greed, exploitation, and injustice, he did not spare his fellow Filipinos from his harsh criticism of the regime. He condemned them for being greed, corruption, hypocrisy, and cowardice, which contributed so much to the abuses of the civil officials and the friars. Another message communicated by Rizal was on the course of action Filipinos should take should Spain not listen to his warning. As Filipinos had desired assimilation for a long time, Spain should grant it. Should Spain not accede to the clamor for assimilation, the people may eventually prefer to die rather than endure the miseries any longer. Violent means to effect change would thus become inevitable to achieve their goal.
The reluctant revolutionary in his concept of independence. As already stated, the El Filibusterismo is a novel about a revolution that failed, which was orchestrated by Simon. Thus, in the Fili, he returned to the Philippines for the purpose of undermining the Spanish regime by encouraging corruption in the government, using his wealth and influence, and by fomenting economic distress to prod people to take up arms against the government. Simon attempted twice to carry out his sinister plan. He planned to seize control of Manila with the help of the outlaws and disaffected Filipino regiment. This, nonetheless, failed as Simon became anesthetized upon learning that Maria Clara died at the nunnery of Santa Clara. The second plan was to blow up the venue of the wedding feast of Polita Gomez and Juanito Pelaez, through a lamp prepared by him as a gift by the Governor-General to the new couple. This again did not materialize owing to the intervention of Isagani, who seized the lamp and threw into the sea. Rizal, through Simon, had come to realize that independence was the solution to the miseries of the people under Spanish rule. This point can be gleaned in Simon's exchange of views with Basilio. Instead of aspiring to be a mere province, aspire to be a nation. Develop an independent, not colonial mentality. There are no tyrants where there are no slaves. Basilio replied, "Science can redeem man from social and other forms of persecution." Simon countered by saying, "Patriotism will always be a virtue in oppressed people." Through Father Florentino, Rizal mounted his idea on how independence should be won. This was at the time of Simon's retreat at the farmer's house near the sea. In the conversation that transpired between the two at Simon's dying moment, Simon said, "Why has God forsaken me? Is not God justice? Is it God's will that the Philippines remain under its present condition?" Father Florentino responded to his query in this manner: "I do not know. I cannot read the mind of the inscrutable, but I know that He has not forsaken those people that in times of decision have placed themselves in His hands and made Him in the judge of their oppression. I know that His arm have never been wanting when, with justice trampled underfoot and all other resources exhausted, the oppressed have taken up the sword and fought for their homes, wives, and children, and inalienable rights. God is justice, and He cannot abandon His own cause, the cause of freedom, without which no justice is possible." On the question as to why God abandoned Simon, despite his efforts at working for justice, Father Florentino remarked, "If our country is someday to be free, it will not through vice. It will not be through the corruption of its sons. Redemption presupposes virtue. Virtue, sacrifice, and sacrifice, love." The foregoing statements imply that, from the viewpoint of Father Florentino, God abandoned Simon in his struggle since he employed methods unacceptable to God. On the issue of why Filipinos suffer if God is a God of justice, Father Florentino counted Rizal in this manner: "He is the God of liberty, who makes us love it by making the yoke heavy upon us, a God of mercy and justice, who betters us as He chastises us and only grants happiness to him who has merited it by his efforts. I do not mean that our freedom is to be won at the point of the sword. The sword counts for little in the destinies of modern times. But it is true that we must win it by deserving it, exalting reason and the dignity of the individual, loving what is just, what is good, what is great, even to the point of dying. When the people rises to this height, God provides the weapon, and the idols fall. The tyrants fall like a house of cards. We owe our misfortunes to ourselves. Let us not blame anyone else. If Spain were to see us less complacent with tyranny and more disposed to struggle and suffer for our rights, Spain would be the first to give us liberty. With or without Spain, they would be the same, and perhaps even worse. Why independence if the slaves of today will be the tyrants of tomorrow? Rizal's message from the foregoing statements of Father Florentino is very lucid. If Filipinos will not be courageous enough to protest and proclaim their rights, be willing to sacrifice, and shed off their silence in the face of oppression and tyranny, then they don't deserve to be given freedom. The conversation that transpired between Father Florentino and Simon during the dying moment of Simon goes to show that Rizal was a reluctant revolutionary. While he was in the belief that assimilation is not possible and that independence was the remedy to alleviate the sufferings of the Filipinos under Spanish rule, Rizal hesitates and backs down. To Rizal's thinking, the Filipinos of his time were not ready for a revolution as they were not ready for independence. They were not ready for independence as they were still unworthy to become independent. They will only be worthy of independence the moment they had learned to prioritize social good over their personal advantage and had become a nation. For Rizal, God would provide the means, be it a revolution or peaceful separation from Spain. From the foregoing, Rizal made it plain and clear that the Filipinos have to make themselves worthy for the freedom before they can become independent. Deserving freedom, however, necessitates the need for the Filipinos to travel the following paths or roads: education, exemplary lives, and willingness to sacrifice for one's convictions. After the publication of El Filibusterismo, Rizal no longer shared the view of the reforms, that reforms in the country will be granted by the Spanish government. He gave up the idea of gradual and peaceful emancipation of the country, which he clearly communicated to Blooming Creek in 1887. As stressed by Rizal in the aforementioned correspondence, peaceful struggle would just remain a dream, considering that Spain had not learned the lesson of her former colonies in South America. Believing that reforms would no longer be granted by Spain, Rizal became a separatist. As a separatist, he was quite unique considering that he left to God the attainment of independence. After the publication of the Philly, Rizal was bitterly attacked and mocked by his fellow reformers in Madrid. This can be accounted for by the very radical and subversive tone of the novel, which renounced the propaganda campaign for peaceful reforms and assimilation. This made Rizal decide to sever his connection with the propagandists in Madrid to avert possible split in their unity. Totally free and detached from the propagandists in Europe, Rizal opted to return to the Philippines to share the misfortunes of his family.